Thank you, our viewers, for joining us. I'm Karagawa Boardrooms, and thank you for being our #1 support audience. We're going to talk about something pretty interesting and quite significant for a systemic nature of the governance of our nation, and that is decentralization, the future of our local governments. So before we go into a detailed discussion, let's go for this particular introduction just to give an overview. Then we'll be right back into the studio.
Historians have described the history of governments and empires in times of 750 and 486 BC was a master of organization, and for the first time in history, centralization becomes a political fact. He also noted that this contrasted with the decentralization of ancient Greece. The practice of government decentralization in particular has both political and administrative aspects. Its decentralization may be territorial, moving power from a central city to other localities, and it may be functional, moving decision-making from the top administrator of any branch of government to lower-level officials, or divesting of the function entirely through privatization. It has been called the new public management, which has been described as decentralization, management by objectives, contracting out, competition within government, and consumer orientation. Uganda introduced the decentralization policy in 1997 under the Local Government Act of 1997 that has since undergone 5 amendments, the most recent being in 2015. The policy inherently decentralized service delivery institutions and their governance in order to improve access to services for the rural poor. Several authoritative analysts and internal government critics, however, have revealed that the results in terms of attaining the objectives of decentralization are mixed. While as anticipated, generally, decentralization resulted in greater participation and control over service delivery and governance by local communities, local governments are still grappling with a range of challenges, namely inadequate local financial resources and an over-reliance on conditional central government grants, the inability to attract and retain sufficient trained and experienced staff, corruption, nepotism, and elite capture. With regard to the specific services, while universal primary education policy under the decentralization framework is credited with a dramatic increase in primary school enrollment, public primary education services are still dogged by concerns over financing, equity, quality, and the need for curriculum reform. Some studies show that there has been no improvement in health services, with many health status indicators either stagnating or worsening. Considering this dilemma of our decentralization governance system, NTV Uganda has teamed up with Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment ACORD to discuss their recent insightful research done on the state of decentralization in Uganda. You're welcome.
Karagawa Boardrooms is my name, and we're coming to you live from the Kampala International Conference Center. We are on air and online streaming live. And we've posted a question on both our online platforms on Facebook and Twitter, asking you to just give your assessment of the decentralization governance performance in Uganda. And I can see Edward Gumesiriza, he says on Facebook that the central government can do better, but the problem is only the head of the state. And then Wabui Dennis says that decentralization was done in good faith, but with bad intentions. It was mainly done to make political gains for the ruling party. And then on Twitter, I have Roberts Aisha. She says, decentralization comes along with industrialization. There is no way we can have one. Thank you for joining us. And right now, straight away, let's get started with my elegant panelists. And right on my extreme left, I have Mr. Ben Kumumanya. Okay, thanks for correcting me on that pronunciation. And then he is the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Local Government. Ben, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Indeed. And right in the middle here, just next to me, is Professor Dr. Wilson Winston Muhwezi, the Director of Research, Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, ACORD. Wilson, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So, Wilson, because you did this research profoundly, dealing with the trends, the challenges, and of course the future of local governments, and the Constitution has its own tenets, especially properly elaborated in Chapter 11, Section 176 specifically, and it states that the state shall be guided by the principle of decentralization and devolution of government functions. The system shall be such as to ensure that functions, powers, and responsibilities are devolved and transferred to local government units in a coordinated manner, and it says that the system shall be also such to ensure that full realization of democratic governance at all local government levels is ensured. So, if you look at Uganda in retrospect, of course, after the introduction of this particular policy, just help us to understand if Ugandans are benefiting from this particular principle of governance, other than if it was centralization more systematically opted for.
Thank you very much.
Baldwins.
Baldwins. Yeah, thank you very much, Baldwins,
Yes.
for giving us the opportunity to discuss this important subject. And as you correctly said, the Accord did carry out this research. We commissioned experts, and they brought a very wonderful report that was disseminated on 13th of this month in a national conference. We are very grateful to the partnership we have with the Ministry of Local Government and actually development partners, GAP, supported by, that is Governance, Participation, Accountability and Performance Program, funded by USAID and UKAID, for having put together this. Now, back to the question that you have just put across to me, I would say yes. And as a researcher, there is always another side, perhaps no. But yes, because I think decentralization has done a great deal. The governance of service delivery institution was brought closer to the people with the enactment of the Local Government Act in 1997. And there was strengthened citizen participation. I think that stands out clearly. Strengthened citizen participation in local government, in fostering deliberative decision-making, people sitting in the villages under a tree or in a church compound or in a school to deliberate on matters that affect them. That, to me, was very good. But there is also choosing of leaders all the way from the lowest level, the village, cascading upwards to the national level. I think that was something, that was a plus. There was enhanced ability of local governments to provide services substantially across education, health, monitoring. I know in these local governments you find health unit management committees, in schools you find LCs providing oversight. So that has been, and it continues to be a great deal in terms of how we have gained from decentralization. So to that extent, I think Ugandans have gained from this digitalization system than if it was centralization. Mm-hmm. However, of course, there is a need for strong local government structures if this system is translated into fully functioning facilities. And there are challenges, a few challenges that...
which we're going to tackle, because I even asked for
recommendations
depending on what you suggested.
Okay.
And thanks for that. Ben, you're the most authoritative person here, of course, representing government. You're the local government ministry permanent secretary, meaning you have really been there for quite a while looking at this. And the policy seems to be challenged because the study that Professor Winston and Accord conducted gives challenges to Uganda's decentralization. They say that local governments remain subservient to the central government, thereby undermining the trust of devolution. And while the creation of new local government units has facilitated service access and eased the ethnic tensions, the operation of these districts in their current form remains a costly undertaking. And lastly, which is quite critical, some of these districts were operating below optimal functionality due to inadequate financing. So in your view, is the policy of decentralization, which you're very keen on and robustly, I think, promoting as government, do you think it's still relevantly designed to meet the needs of the ordinary people? Or there are new trends that should necessitate the revision of this policy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Baldwin. First and foremost, I wish to state or submit that decentralization is still very relevant, and this is because it has three very important, robust variables which have never been tampered with and which cannot change. The first is the legal framework. Our constitution is very clear, as you already mentioned, Article 176 of the constitution. The Local Government Act is very clear in terms of allocating responsibilities and mandates for the local government to do that one. So that one is there. The second strong variable which is there is the fact that the people, the human beings, the politicians, the elected people are available. And these are available right from the village up to the district. And these people who are elected represent all sections of society and all geographical entities. I wish to mention that at every village, there is an executive committee, the village executive committee, which we normally call VEC, of 11 people. And these 11 people are picked from the community and they represent youth, disabled women. And this structure, which I call a governance infrastructure, goes at the parish. When you go to the sub-county, you find that there are councillors representing electoral areas, representing youth, representing disabled elderly. That's another variable which is also available. The third variable which is untampered with is the political will. Government has consistently been adding on by amending the laws to make it possible to have decentralization operate without any hindrance. One of the exhibits manifested as a strong government political will is last year's investment into LOC1 and LOC2 elections. A lot of resources were put there to ensure that that structure of governance is available. So those actually show that they have never been tampered with and they are really growing day by day. Now then, the only challenge we have had is adequate resources, and we have an explanation for this. In the 1990s, when we started decentralization, we had, as a government, brought in a very important governance subject on the table. And people came to support us with resources. Danida came, the World Bank came, and many others came to support the government to provide resources for decentralization. In the recent past, these resources had started waning, and therefore that's why we have a challenge. So what are we going now? What are we doing now? What we are doing now is that we have now, government has created local government as a sector. And the sector now, one of its strategic actions is to actually marshal support in terms of technical know-how, capacity building, resources, both from within and from without. And once we have resources, then everything is fine. So decentralization is still valid, and we are already working out to make sure that we can tackle the issue of resources, and once we have enough resources, then we can move. Now, on the question of the findings that some districts are operating below percentage, that's not a permanent feature. For example, because of stepped-up inspection of the ministry and awareness by all stakeholders, between March and June, 79 districts advertised to fill vacancies which were hitherto been unfilled for some time. So that shows that the grass is half full. There is a lot of effort, there is a lot of concern, there is a lot of preparation to address some of those issues like staff, to address some of those issues like resource availability. And then once we do that one, then we are home and dry. So I'm very confident and satisfied that for sure we are on the right track, notwithstanding challenges, which challenges had been envisaged even at the design of the decentralization policy. Yeah.
Okay, we very brilliantly introduced, and at least you're giving us both perspectives from the exterior part of looking at this issue and from the central aspect of the local government permanent ministry eyes. So let's go for a break and then come back and deal with the broader, bigger picture on this particular matter. Thanks our viewers. Let's just go for a short break and we'll be right back. Thanks for you continuing with us. I'm Karagao Bodwins, and we're dealing with the future of local governments or local governance and decentralization in Uganda. And we've asked you a question on our social media platforms about the goodwill. Do you think our politicians or our government has the goodwill to ensure that decentralization works? And I see Akiki Robert says that since inception, decentralization hasn't solved the problems we faced under the centralization system. And Rosette Nahabwe says the central government has no goodwill for effective functioning of local governments. Only political structures are a bit decentralized, but the technical operations are to a greater extent centralized. Lastly, Batuya says that I think decentralization is performing better, however corruption and inadequate supervision are killing it. And Professor Winston, you're hearing all these responses, and of course in your study I can see what you, in reflection to these very sentiments, you're saying that the political devolution has been a major milestone of the decentralization in Uganda, in particular the electing of local leaders, that is in terms of political practice. Another achievement of the decentralization policy has been the reversal of centrally driven planning and budgeting. So, with a reflection from, of course, the challenges that we've been discussing about and looking at, there's good performance even reflecting on the infrastructure that has been done. But practically, do you feel that the devolution of powers from the center works effectively for the benefit of the common citizens themselves? And what, in your own view, what are the people saying on the ground about this particular system?
Yeah. As you have just put it very well, and the permanent secretary talked about these people are electing their leaders. That's a very big thing. It's a very big point that from the lowest level to the top, people are able to elect their leaders. So the issue of even registration and representation at the lowest level in districts, they pass ordinances, they pass bylaws that govern their operations and functions. So I think that's an achievement. The reversal of centrally controlled budgeting and planning, we just talked about it, very good thing. So that's a plus as far as I'm concerned. But the increase in volume of services, because with the decentralization units, districts, you get district hospitals, schools start to percolate. There is a number of services that move along with administrative structures being created. So in my view...
But the argument is, in as much as you're devoluting the practice of political participation, over democratizing the local grassroots communities, the actual services are not as impressive than if they were centrally maybe instructed.
Actually, that's where I was going, that, you know, we talk about two things. You can have volume, but there is also the issue of quality. So quality can come after volume. Then you progressively start to improve, because quite frankly, at the end of the day, you need to have something, then you work on how to improve it. Because quite frankly, in the research that was done by our consultants that we commissioned, the findings show that there are challenges. There are challenges. For example, the issue of quality stands out. In health units, there are complaints, but these, I think, can be handled after you have had the volume or the quantity. The legal framework that established decentralization was comprehensive enough, but not very, very strong to drive it through all the way according to the policy. So there are still challenges, and I think the PS alluded to this, that it's a process. You grow. You are not born today and you become an adult. You go through some phases. Certainly issues of staffing, you've talked about them. In many of these local governments, our research found that there are some deficits, some gaps, some reforms, by the way, at the center. For example, the Public Finance Management Act 2015 has some provision that seem to contradict the Local Government Act, and that creates some frustration along the way, and we think that should be ironed out. And I don't think the permanent secretary would perhaps deny that there is no problem. So there is need to harmonize, or to bring into harmony the different legislation so that we can smoothen the path to decentralization. Creation of urban centers, for example, in a way, cut back the income and the resource base of some of the districts. They are left bare. That's an issue that can be handled, and it was found out in our research that that's a problem. Some functions of local governments, our research showed that they had become dysfunctional. Local government committees on public accounts, or even the audit function in many of the districts is not very strong. So there are certain deficits, which shows there is work to do.
Yeah, and there's good work, because in your research you give a positive reflection from the Ministry of Works and Transport, where you showed the trajectory or the performance in especially roads infrastructure construction, where about 99% of national roads had been the change in kilometers between 2008 and 2016. Quite profound, and I think my producer will just project that particular success. Ben, now, when you are thinking about this, of course the component is about resourcing. Somebody would wish to understand how the resourcing, the financing is done for the promotion of decentralization. And the argument against it is that it's over-bloating the administrative cost of government, because you have 135 district councils, you have about 5 city division councils, you have about 41 municipal councils, you have 124 municipal divisions, you have 425 municipal town councils. Okay, town councils, which are 425, and sub-county councils, which are 1,671. And this is an amorphously huge administrative burden on government, notwithstanding that you have also about 452 MPs representing generally all the districts. How is this possible to fund this entire labyrinth and structure of this magnitude, and to make it survive?
Yeah, thank you very much, Baldwin, for bringing this one out. Now, this had been envisaged even at the time of the design of decentralization. In 1995 Constitution, Article 176, 2D, is very, very elaborate. And it says there shall be a sound financial base for decentralization. So it means even the framers realized that we need money, and those resources, to me or to us, we call them investment. For anything good, something spread out, robust, reaching everyone, you need to put in an adequate investment. So our challenge now is mobilizing those resources that can actually make an adequate investment into decentralization. But one thing I want to mention is that the reason why research can even get this feedback is because decentralization is active, people are there, they know what they want, they know what they are lacking, they know what they would need, and therefore they are able to actually inform research, like this one done by Accord, to be able to bring these issues out. And for us at the Ministry, we will come with this research because we shall use it to make policies and strategies and strategic actions which can address these issues. But one other thing we need to appreciate is that for the population, you need to see how they express their happiness and appreciation when it comes to these issues of the districts. I have a recent example which I normally want to share with people, and this was on the 30th of June in the newly created district called Obonji. Obonji was created to start effective 1st of July. And because of the expectations and happiness of the population of Obonji, they decided that to go on 30th at their newly created headquarters, and they remained there up to midnight, waiting to receive their newly born district. And to me, as a political scientist, it shows how people are expressing themselves on having something which will address their issues. One of the issues why decentralization was adopted was because the issue of proximity of decision making on where the problem is. Where people who appreciate their problem, they are living with the problem, and they can actually give feedback on the problem are the ones who are actually participating in that decision-making process. And that's why at the design of decentralization, we usually say that this policy will give people the chance to shape their destiny through popular participation. So at least we are happy because, one, the decision makers are nearer and closer to the population, and for sure they have a high appreciation and internalization of the problem. Now, on the question of financing, again also at the design of decentralization, it was agreed that you would have to do financing through three different grant central government transfer system in addition to local revenue. And this was supposed to be the conditional grants, unconditional grants, and then equalization grants. Now, we have been having reforms actually of these processes, and actually recently we have something called DDEG, Decentralization, Discretionary Equalization Grant. So the government has been trying to reform and create more robust means of supporting these local governments. Aria had mentioned about the commitment of government. Recently, government secured equipment for construction of roads for almost all the districts by giving a road unit to each district. So to me, once those big ones are actually being sorted out, the remaining parties for us now who are managing the process to now be able to design appropriate policies, to do networking, to mobilize what is not available now so that we are able to get solutions. And that's why government saw it fit that local government should be an own sector, and so effective July 1st we are a sector. And what are the advantages of a sector? The first one is a platform. We now have a platform to be able to communicate to anyone on our challenges, on our needs, on our strategies, which is very, very, very important. The other one is networking. Now we can network with other stakeholders and of course other allies to support us to address those issues. And of course also it makes us have visibility. So that's why for us we are very optimistic that yes, issues are there and the research findings have pointed them out, but we are very, very confident that we have the capacity to address them, not at once, but over the time we are going to be tackling these issues.
So it's still surviving and progressing.
Yes,
all right,
yes.
Thank you, Ben. Dr. Wilson, so local government financing, as he was alluding to, is under the Public Management Act 2015 and the Local Government Finance Commission, which was set up to advise both local government and central government, is in place. However, different things from different researchers, not even exclusive of your own, it indicates that the transfer of real power to the districts with the aim of reducing the load of work on remote and under-resourced central officials is still pretty curtailed. Actually, it's being receded. There's a lot of kind of re-centralization propensity on that regard. So considering the current, especially the current 2019-2020 national budget, do you think that the fiscal allocations made to the local government docket meet the actual objectives of supporting effective and the efficient running of local government? Just in contestation or perhaps in support of what he's saying.
Yeah, I think that I remember the basic principle in economics that resources are scarce. Usually resources are scarce and you never have enough resources to do everything. That said and done, I know that from the research that we was commissioned and the findings that speak to us, most of these local governments would struggle because of some of the explanations we have already given. If all the financial resources for activities in local governments were released, these local governments would perform very well. But it's all about how big the national purse is and how much can be doled out. However, in this analysis that was done by our the eminent economists at ACCORD, were able to point out, and we did point out this to the different relevant committees of Parliament, Local Government Finance Commission. We interface with our colleagues in the Ministry of Local Government to show that there are certain functions that are supposed to be implemented in local governments by local governments, but quite clearly in the proposals before the budget was discussed and read, some money that would have done that seemed to be sitting at the center. And we thought that was a challenge. We pointed this out in this research report. Actually, up to slightly over over a trillion shillings in the proposal at that time being at the center, but implementing activities in the districts, like a valley dam somewhere, building a school somewhere, and we're like, come on, this is the work of local governments. Why don't you front load the money to the people who do the implementation? So we thought that was a big challenge. And we did that in analyzing some specific sectors like health, education, agriculture, works, those specifically that have most of the functions that are decentralized. So we thought that was a challenge, and we raised it, and we were listened to, and we think progressively going ahead. Yes. That was a message that was well received wherever we put it.
And you know, Dr. Nso, you're trying to be very diplomatic, because I know Ben must be quite a colleague of yours in the same sector. But let me just quote your research, because you point out specifically the problem, which is literally re-centralization.
Yes.
And you're saying that especially of the fiscal aspects of the local government was raised as a major challenge across the board. The major issues here are related to reporting mechanisms, especially under the performance-based system, and the ever-reducing authority of the local governments over the resources, including local revenue. Just secondly, some district staff structures were not fully filled. Okay, you've hinted on that. But how much control, Ben, does your central system, the central government decision-making, is ceded to local governments? And do you think that, do you have measures in place to ensure that the objective of service delivery to the grassroots is realized without necessarily curtailing the autonomy in terms of decision-making of the local governments, but also in contradiction based on this particular report finding that you are re-centralizing right now most of the functions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bolden, for bringing that one out. Now, what I can say is that to us, we wouldn't want to call it even re-centralization, but a number of reforms have been going on. But also, in addition to reforms, there is the question of performance standards, which was clearly captured in the law. For example, the central government is responsible for a number of activities, including adherence and compliance with the policy framework of the country. So in that attempt to ensure compliance and adherence, you'll find that the central government is also in the space. However, one of the things we want to do as a sector, which became effective 1st July, is to try to operationalize Article 176 2E of the Constitution. And this 2E stipulates that appropriate measures shall be taken to enable local governments to do all these issues. So I think we want to make sure that now, than any other time before, we should be able to bring together all the other actors, the MDAs, and make sure that instead of now the ministries and departments and agencies, that instead of now people doing things which should be done by local governments, would rather now support local governments by operationalizing that article of the Constitution to make sure that things are done there. Because, as I mentioned, the principles are still valid. So I'm very optimistic that that's a matter we're going to address, and that's why I'm saying we are very happy with the findings, because these findings have shown that actually we have some work to do. So me, I'm very confident and optimistic that if we now sit together, because we are a sector now, all ministries are now members of our sector working groups, so we shall look at this matter and we shall get a solution about it. So I don't think there's any cause for alarm now, but as I mentioned, one of the other things is to do networking. On the 13th, we had that national conference on decentralization, and we're able to now share the same roof with the researchers, with other actors, to bring out issues about decentralization. So yes, those things are there, but we are addressing them. I already mentioned that recruitment now, we have been trying to address it. I mentioned that in the last 3 months, we were able to push so that 79 districts are advertising, are getting wage, are filling the posts. So the situation is not as it was last year. So we are really moving in the right direction. And then we have the capacity, with being the sector now, of really addressing some of these issues. Now,
and you have a joint sector review, kind of annual arrangement.
Yes, now with the sector, we're going to be having sector planning, we're going to have sector reviews, and then we shall be able to look at all those issues.
Okay, so let me take on just a short break, and when we come back as we're wrapping up, one of the key hot potato issues is the accusation that government is using this decentralization governance system for gerrymandering. And that's why political devolution is more effective than actual service delivery on the ground. So let's go for a break, our viewers, and then we'll be right back to wrap this up. Thank you for continuing with us. Again, I'm Kaga Bodwins, and we are live on air and online, and I believe we are live streaming. And on our social media platforms, again, we've posted another question asking you for suggestions on how to just reinforce and have the decentralization system work and perform better. And Katas Kasigazi says that I tell you this question is very hard for me to answer. Service delivery in Uganda, all those in government are okay. That's quite, I'm not going to state that. Begumisa Baguma says that this centralize all heads of departments. Imagine recruiting based on some of the, okay, pretty ineligible. Betty Kiwala says equal distribution of resources will do us good. Okay, thanks for those views. Please keep them coming, and I believe somebody will be following up just to find out your very sentiment on this. And so, Professor Wilson, you have the devolution of powers. In this particular regard, you have political powers are given to councils headed by politically elected leaders. You have fiscal powers, which councils collect and appropriate resources in their budgets to some extent, though some of the avenues were quashed. Administrative powers, you have geographically gazetted administrative units and councils manage staff in their districts. Then you have planning powers, legislative powers, and judicial powers. So the policy was introduced with these following objectives, just to let me mention: enhance the contribution of the public, private sector, civil society, and community-based organizations to national development, and improve the quality of service policy formulation. However, the issue of politics about getting so many districts, okay, which I've mentioned earlier on, so many really in number, is that the central government, the current sitting government, is using this approach of decentralization to do gerrymandering. You break down very small districts into multiple districts so that you can get greater constituencies which have leaning towards your own political ideology, so that people can support you on the ground and you can get greater political weight. What is your response about this particular accusation that the central government is actually using this policy for just political purposes, not necessarily for service delivery?
Baldwin, that one is a tough one. But let me say this: I think there are mixed schools of thought on what you've just talked about. Different debates go on about this topic. Some of the people think, like you've just said, that this is gerrymandering and doing all this kind of stuff. However, I also think there is another group of people who think that there are genuine pressures that happen and agitations based on different reasons for creation of these districts. Some of these districts, remember that our population is a very fast-growing population. And perhaps Ben would know, but they have a criteria that they follow. But as a researcher, as somebody who looks at trends, I think we have a very fast-growing population. So if a certain area has got the population, even if it is small in size.
You know, Professor, I know you're trying to be very diplomatic.
Yes.
I can give you,
Yes.
and I don't want to be very specific because I know this has political heat. But if I went into that regard to be very particular, somebody looks at some of the districts that have been over-balkanized into multiple districts, that they have a far much stronger leaning towards the sitting government, okay? And those bigger districts that have a certain maybe disinterest in the current government are not actually broken down, and that's where the accusation comes from. Of course, it's not reflected in this study. I needed to bring it in. Yes, so you have, isn't there sentiment on the ground? That actually
let me express my views on this. Really, I said there are debates on both sides of the divide. In my thinking, the first point I've made, that it could be general because the populations have increased and in an area, even when it's small in size, but the size of the population requires that they can have a district. But there could also be desire to be close to service delivery, issues of jobs. With any new administrative unit, a district created, you know, there are jobs, both political and technical. This is a country with a lot of unemployment. Could it be a solution? Perhaps. There are issues to do with some reasons that may appear irrational, but they are logical. Issues of tribal tensions and nationalistic tendencies, and to help with the people fighting and struggling in a district council where the services cannot be delivered. Then the different people have different units. So quite frankly, I think that in pursuit of harmony, some of the districts may be created for purposely dealing with those political tensions that can happen because people do not agree. So ultimately, I think there are reasons, genuine reasons, why you may have these units created. And that's my thinking. But
yes, Ben, you're coming in. You know, I understand. Winston is an academician, Ben is a technocrat, and I don't want, of course, to throw you into the heat of this as politicians. Yes. I wish I had a politician here. But let me give you just if factual realities that you have. You have about 3,156 district chairpersons, district local government councillors. You have 1,224 municipality city division chairpersons. You have about 24,140 sub-county municipal division government councils, rather local government councils. You have 601,000 youth members, youth council members, and I can go on and on about this. So why do you think, and actually their finding is just that the study established that there was, until recently, just on 1st of July, waning support to the decentralization policy, noting that it is missing at the table of government priorities, political expedience and needs tended to drive this decentralization policy, which could be interpreted as political representation and political play. There is actually a certain, based on this particular research finding, that you internally as government, you are getting somehow fed up with this decentralization aspect. There is a drive for decentralization because of the weight on the ground for administrative costs and stuff like that. Well, is there a waning sentiment about this?
Well, thank you very much. What I wanted to mention was that first and foremost, the issue of creating units is very well elaborated in the Constitution. And the Constitution traditionally had issues like population density, administrative inconvenience, distance, and other features. But the framers of the 1995 Constitution even added one other thing, when the people demand for that one. And when people demand, they are supposed to be served. They are supposed to be given what they have asked for.
No, I don't have a dispute about that, because you're going back to politics. Don't you think, because there's an accusation that there's an arbitrary nature of granting those districts because they have political advantage by multiplying constituency weight for political support for the sitting government, in as much as it's credibly established in the Constitution that this should be done. But it is done arbitrarily to the political benefit of the central government that is sitting.
That's an opinion, but if you can recall, the last batch of districts were created in 2015. It was thoroughly debated. It was done through the Parliament of Uganda, and there was justification for each of those districts. So, yes, people may have that opinion probably because they are not exposed to the very reasons and the processes we go through to create these districts. But now, as I mentioned, the beauty now is that local government, being a sector, will be very visible everywhere explaining these things to make sure that people understand what happens with these processes. The other issue I wanted to mention, Baldwin, is that one of the ultimate purposes of decentralization was to increase popular participation by enabling people to participate in the management of their affairs. So if you create these units and you are now using the law to give them the mandates to be able to manage their affairs, then it's okay, it's still in the right direction. The only thing I mentioned was that we only need to make sure we give them what they need. And they just need majorly two things, because the third one is available. One is the resources. For example, local governments, according to Article 176 2G, are supposed to physically inspect and monitor the service delivery. But because of inadequate financing, they don't do a lot of that one. So our job is to get the resources to enable them do that. The other role we have to do is to make sure that appropriate technical staff are recruited and are available in all these local governments to be able to direct technically policies of government towards service delivery. So once we are able to do those two, then now those coupled with now these people who are elected. One of the examples I normally give is that in the 60s and 70s, if you can recall, there were parents and teachers associations who were actually literally managing primary schools. And they were doing everything. They were collecting building fund. They were actually taking, even the times when we were not doing well in the 70s. That means that the population, if you help them with certain ingredients, they have the capacity to direct decision making on how to manage and address their affairs. So one, decentralization is not that it's waning. What has been happening was that we were lacking some potential visibility because of the fact that we are not within the platform of sectors, because you see government budgeting and financing and planning works through sectors. Now that we have got that, I think we have the capacity to look at some of these issues. But as I mentioned, like last year, the LC1-2 elections, the issue of road equipment for local governments, the issue of making sure that the laws are in place, shows that government is still taking decentralization very, very seriously. One other thing we want to do as a sector is that Section 96 and 97 of the Local Government Act brings out functions and responsibilities of line ministries. We want to make sure that these line ministries are down there, not in Kampala here, giving direction, giving technical guidance to local governments in their areas of specialty. Section 98 talks about inspection. We are going to make sure that we check whether central government agencies are really inspecting to help them. So I think what happened was that each group left the other one to direct these issues, and that's why we are not doing very well. So me, I'm very sure and confident that once now we are working together, MDAs are doing their part, the local governments who are there also are doing their part, the Ministry of Local Government is also doing its part, then I'm very confident that we shall be able to achieve higher results. Now, I've already mentioned the issue of expression, and I normally use this case of Bonji. I didn't finish it last time when I talked about it. When they went the day before on 30th, they waited for after midnight. They put up a flag. That's a very, very big statement. And then they remained there until the next day when they had an official rally to receive their districts and be aware that now they have a machinery that will help to address service delivery issues in that area. So that shows that really the need to have that district was so much built in that expression of the population. So my take is that our job is, let's do our part, let's look for them resources, let's get the human resource, let's make policies which work, and local governments will be able to really flourish, and they will address the issues of the citizens, as was the objective in 1993.
Yeah, you have a very optimistic, flashy picture of local governance.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely there's work done. All right, as we're wrapping up, brilliantly stated, Ben. So we're wrapping up. You made recommendations, Winston, and I think you can just in about 2.5 minutes just air them out,
yes,
and see whether Ben will be receptive to them and promise.
Yes, we have shared these recommendations with Ben certainly. But
actually, your report is online, is on your website, and it's a beautiful study that is in there, so it's accessible to all of us. Please, you can go on. Yes, sure.
No, I can re-echo the fact that the new status that the local government sector has achieved now implies more clout, implies better negotiation, implies sitting on the high table to negotiate for financing and streamlining issues. So I think the process of actualizing this new sector needs to be fast-tracked, and that's one of the big recommendations in this report, so that the transformation is visible in these local governments, in districts, and even the lower administrative units. We think that supposed to be legal and policy reforms. There is need, for example, to harmonize the Public Finance Management Act and make it more responsive and facilitatory, if that word can be used,
Yes.
to facilitate local governance. I think that is very necessary. There is also need for immediate review of the local government sector strategic plan, align it and give it more tempo and align it with the NDP3 processes. Fortunately, we are in the National Development Plan 3 development, and we have this ministry becoming a sector. So things seem to be looking very well. There is the need for adequate financing of LED, local economic development. It's one of the pillars, major pillars. And I think we need to facilitate political leaders, think out of the box, and administrative leaders search for local economic development opportunities in the districts. This really requires creativity, requires innovation. These same leaders have a role which they could step up through monitoring of decentralized service delivery, but local economic development, local income from the resource things that are happening. There is the need to build the Ministry of Local Government and local government capacities for resource mobilization. This is tied to lead, and this will help. I mean, there is already goodwill in communities where I come from. People mobilize resources for weddings, funerals. That means people can actually mobilize resources. And once you have the resources, because you need capital, somebody with an idea, if you have them in circles and they have some fund, you can borrow at a smaller interest and do an economic activity. And ultimately, the aggregate of so many people doing those village-based resource mobilization is massive.
Yeah, but one of the recommendations,
Yes.
I guess, hopefully I'm not preempting, but just 1 minute, you're asking for a moratorium on the creation of new districts.
Yes, and we mentioned this because I think even the Parliament had already talked about this, that there should be a moratorium. I think, quite frankly,
Moratorium means you pause.
Put
yes,
on
stop.
hold, put
Okay.
a comma, and wait until you evaluate what you've done, whether it's the good thing and if it's giving the results. So yeah, we recommend that moratorium should be revisited. Quite frankly, the cost of public administration in this country, in my view, and in the view of the researchers that did this work, is very high.
Now you're talking as we're ending. So, Ben, please respond.
Yes,
just
yes,
in 2
yes.
minutes, you're
Yeah,
wrapping up. You
Just
have
in
your
2
last-
minutes,
Yes.
what I wanted to mention was that, with decentralization had looked at issues of one, decision making. I talked about it, recruitment, which is done. But also, Professor mentioned about local economic development. This was adopted as the 6th pillar of decentralization. And this is supposed to boost the local revenue base. And as a ministry, together working with Operation Wealth Segregation and other stakeholders, we have already started by what we call AgriLed. AgriLed is a program that is regionally based, and you look at the potentialities of a region. We have already designed a robust program for the Rwenzori region. Recently, last week, there was a symposium in West Nile. They are also designing something. There is also an initiative coming up from northern Uganda. Another initiative is coming up from the Tigeze region. So we are now going to build regional bases to make sure that we boost local economic development to be able to sustainably contribute on local revenue base. Then on the question of moratorium, it's not the first time. That's not even, it had ever happened. And at one time, then there were some justifications, so it can happen again and again, and we don't have any problem with it. Okay. But what we only want to know is that if there is need, then nothing should be cast in iron and stone. But otherwise, it has ever happened, and it can happen again, and there's no problem with it.
Okay.
But what is important is, are we still in line with what we set out to do? And what we set out to do was, one, giving opportunity the population of Uganda to manage their affairs, to shape their destiny.
The democratization
yes.
of the...
So other things will follow.
Yes.
But I think the key issue is that one, this system gives people a chance that they didn't have before to be able to participate in the running of their affairs.
Okay.
And I think this is a very, very big contribution from a governance angle, even from a development angle. and it's a pro-people issue. So it's very, very positive.
Okay, Ben Kumumanya, I cannot just extend the discussion. It's really pretty heated, and it's an extensive affair to deal with. But you've been prolific and very substantive in contributing to this discussion. Ben Kumumanya, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Local Government, and Professor Wilson Mwezi, the researcher, director of research.
I direct research.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm an academic in Makerere.
Please.
But I come in to support and manage the research portfolio.
I have
so people do very good research.
Academician and technocrat in government, gentlemen, you've been profound, and please keep the good work, and I hope I will see you again here sometime to come. Have a great day, rather night out there, and please go report that you had a great show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks our viewers for keeping with us. I'm Karaga Baldwins, and if you're out there as a government, ministry, or department, or agency, or an NGO, or a corporate entity, and you want to have a structured discussion here at NTV on this platform, please come contact us. We will have this done. And indeed, thanks for keeping us as your #1 station. Karaga Baldwins, have a great night.